featured speaker today is Faye Rutishouser. Did I get it? All right. Faye has just accepted the position as State Water Conservation Coordinator with the Utah Division of Water Resources. She will use over 15 years' experience with Waterwise gardening and extensive knowledge of water conservation principles to help meet the state's goals to conserve water. Her previous experience includes formally owning and operating New Horizons Nursery, a nursery focused solely on Waterwise and native perennials, and at Red Butte Gardens as lead horticulturist of their natural area. Please welcome Faye.
It sounds so official, but I'm really just a plant geek. So I've written out some websites on one of these papers. You're welcome to jot them down, but I can also leave them at a table afterwards if you want to come take a picture of my notes or that kind of thing. Okay, so what I usually like to start with is just trying to find out where people are with regards to conservation. Does anybody do their part to save water? Turn off the water when you're brushing your teeth. Only run full loads, right? Those kinds of things. So just some statistics. Utah is the second driest state in the U.S. We get about 13 inches of water annually. You know, Florida gets that in a storm. The premise for Waterwise Landscaping is we use 60% of our water out in the landscape. So that's why, you know, all the different state agencies and conservation gardens are trying to talk to people about how to conserve water, because that's pretty much where we have a lot to save. So if you think about it, we get 13 inches of water annually. Kentucky bluegrass, which is your typical turf that you find everywhere, takes 30 inches. That's a little bit of a deficit, huh? And when you think about when we get our water, we get about 6 inches during the growing season. So 6 inches to 30 inches. So that's why you hear a lot about taking out turf areas, having practical turf areas. A thing that I always like to say is, if the only time you walk on your grass is to mow it, you have too much. So the concern is, you know, we have a good water year like last winter. You know, the reservoirs are fairly full. You hear the weather reporters have started to say, you know, the status of the reservoirs and things like that, and it sounds pretty optimistic. You know, oh, we had a lot of water. This is good. We're okay. Well, we've actually done our part to reach 18% of a 25% reduction by 2025. However, our population right now is 2.9 million, and in about 2040, we're going to be 4.5 million. So even with just this initial goal of 25%, we still don't have enough adequate resources to provide for everybody. So, you know, I think people's bills are going up, and not enough, in my opinion. Hate me, it's okay, it's okay. I'm usually hooked up, so I'm kind of hiding behind this thing. Anyway, so what happens, you know, come 2040, as we get closer, the state's basically been trying to train us, you know, be prepared for what's going to really happen. And if you think you've had a bill hike now, when we have to dam the Colorado and pipe the Colorado again, or put a dam up in northern Utah, then you see much higher water bills. So the idea of, say, transitioning parts of your yard into low water use or xeriscaping, waterwise landscaping, whatever term you want to use, is to save you money. A lot of times these landscapes save you time. They don't save you money in the beginning because you have to transition, right? And I always encourage people to just pick a part that you can do and just slowly each year kind of transition away from that traditional landscaping. We left England a long time ago. This is the desert. Anyway, so that's some of the background to it, right? Save money, save energy, don't use much fertilizers and pesticides, things like that when you are planting plants adapted to this area. My specialty is obviously natives and waterwise plants, but I do have a bachelor's degree in horticulture, so I know all those pretty plants that just zing us every time we go to the garden center and you want, but should you? Okay, so design principles. There's about 7. Each lecture I could make a lecture out of each point, but I'm just gonna kind of touch on some points of those principles. And then afterwards, if you have questions, I'm more than happy to sit and answer them. Okay, so first when you're looking at your landscape, you wanna determine the functions of areas, right? So where do you wanna have that playground? Where do you wanna have a patio? Where do you wanna have a water feature? Yes, I even said you can have a water feature. It's all about zoning these certain areas into your yard. Where do you want your really pretty areas? All those like really pretty flowers, showy, something that really wows you. It's all about just compartmentalizing and putting those places into areas and watering appropriately. Then you're gonna determine your zones. Does anybody have any questions about zones? Usually that comes up, people say, I don't know what zone we live in. When it says zone 5, am I okay? As if it says zone 9. Any questions? We're typically about a zone anywhere from 4 to 9. If you're really lucky, you're 6, because you get to plant more different plants. But what those numbers mean is the lower the number means the more cold tolerant that perennial is, or shrub, or tree. So basically when our winters get down to, I'm thinking back to Logan, when my alarm clock would go off and it would say, it's -6 out there. And I was supposed to get dressed and go outside. So just the colder, the lower the number. The higher the number is, the warmer. So typically California, they're planting zone 7, zone 9, things like that. I always say, the northern areas, Park City, there you're around a 4 or 5 if you're lucky. Down here in the valley, you're around 5, 6, zone 7. Well, we don't pray anymore, but pray, and maybe it will come back. Okay, so the other thing about determining what's happening in your yard, right? This is a site analysis of your yard. Where do the areas in your yard stay shady? Where do they stay sunny? Where is that spot that the sprinkler just refuses to hit, or that shrub got big and now there's no water right there? Where are the slopes? Where does the water naturally flow to? Because that's going to be a higher water area. Where are your utility lines? I know we get excited and we're like, let's get the tiller and just tear it all up. Find out where those utility lines are. Let's see. Views. What views do you want to have? I'm working on a landscape right now that they have amazing views of the Stansbury Mountains. And he keeps telling me, I want trees, lots of trees right there. And I'm like, you don't want to block that out? That's so amazing. We're compromising. We'll prune them up. so you can see them. Anyway, then it's learn plant characteristics. So I know a lot of times we go to Home Depot and they have those gorgeous azaleas, right? They're like beautiful orange and they're lush. And you remember you took a trip to Oregon and you saw them in an understory somewhere and it was so gorgeous. And then you come back here and you're like, I can totally do that. Yeah. I think we've all wasted that money, right? Or I have killed many, many things to learn what I know. So you want to learn what the plants do, what pH they like. We have fairly alkaline soils here. So we don't have acidic soils, which is why you lose the ability without a tremendous amount of work to do blueberries or azaleas or hydrangeas. It's just more work to try to plant those plants because we have alkaline soil and alkaline water. Bloom time. So when is the plant that you're picking gonna bloom? You know, every year I kind of go through and I look at a spot and I say, oh, I don't have anything that blooms in the spring there. I better look for a plant that blooms in the spring. And a lot of the plants come with tags. They're fairly reliable. Sometimes I'm not sure where they're written for, but they're a good go. They help you. And they put, mature size, zone, and light requirement. Some of them talk about water. Some of them, they don't usually like to divulge that information because you'd probably not want it if they were like, you have to have a riparian area to have this plant, which oftentimes we don't have. The biggest thing about plant characteristics, one of the things that I see happen a lot of times is people, they buy a 1 gallon or like a quart-sized plant and then they plant it thinking, oh, it's just going to be right around that size, 6 inches from their house. So you always want to look at the mature size of plants when you're designing in what you want to have at your yard because that's what it will do over a period of time. And if you don't consider that, then you're probably going to end up you're hacking it out, you're digging it out, you're excessively pruning it to try to make it the plant that you want for that area. So the first 2 sites that I listed, conservewater.utah.gov has a wonderful plant finder, as well as the Conservation Garden Park has a great plant finder, as well as they provide lecture series on irrigation, types of plants, soils, all kinds of wonderful information, free, which is great. You can walk around and go, I like this plant combination together, or, oh, look at what they did with that parking strip. Whoa, I don't have to mow it anymore, I'm not aerating it, I'm not doing anything. So those are 2 great sites for where to find plants, because I know you can go to the garden center and you see like hundreds of plants, right? And you're like, but which ones? How do I know? Blah, blah, blah. So those are wonderful, and the sites are great because you can say, I want a pink flower, I want it during June, I want it to be a low water requirement, and boom, it's a search engine, it just shoots you out a list of plants, which is fantastic. It makes it very easy. And then you go to the garden center, and you say, where are these plants? A lot of garden centers have section plants off, like native and Waterwise. That's your lowest amount of water that you can do, but there's also moderate watering, high water, and it's just about grouping those plants together and setting your irrigation to water those areas appropriately. A lot of times what we found is I think it's over 30% of people just aren't watering correctly. So even just learning that information about what your plant needs, you can conserve water. If you cut out 1 irrigation of your grass, that can save 3,000 gallons of water for the typical yard, just so you know. I am pointing fingers at grass. I am. Next, for more detail on this lecture and a lot more information and a lot more depth, you can go to this www.quell.usu.edu/principles, and it goes through this, these brief points that I'm making in great detail. I promise it's pretty interesting. You won't fall asleep. So, okay. And my last website is kind of a joke, but I'll save it till the end. Okay, so once you've learned about your plants and how you want to group them together, then you want to group these plants, and I've already kind of focused on this, that they have the same requirements. So do they need the same sun exposure? Putting a sun plant with a shade plant, one of them dies. It's just a given. If you put a high water plant in your native bed, somebody's losing out. Your natives are either going to drop dead from overwatering, be chlorotic and sick looking and spindly, or your high water plant is going to die. So just making sure to group those plants together. Water needs, and then soil. Some plants, another thing other than the pH is clay versus loam versus sand. So if you have a high drainage area, you know, down in Sandy, they have a lot of sand, right? I know I'm out in the Tooele Valley, and we're lake bottom. It just, the clay is special. It's very special. I despise it. And I'm glad I have a degree so I can actually make things grow there. Anyway, so just knowing what the plant needs as far as that goes. A lot of times they'll say plant needs good drainage, but you can get away from that in heavy soils because if you're not overwatering, it's not saturated. But if you have a heavy soil, you plant a plant that needs drainage, and then you waterlog your soil, death. So there's tricks, but it takes time. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some principles for design. Is anybody keeping track of my time? Okay. So here we have a house, front walkway. That's better. Okay, so here's the front door to a house. Driveways typically, you know, on one of the sides. Here's a walkway, here's a walkway. So when you're designing plants, when you're looking at who you want to group together, you've figured out, oh, I've got the same water plants. I'm going to plant an Eriogonum, a globe mallow, and a sundancer daisy together. Sweet, I got it. Now what? So then there's some design principles. So one of those principles is called balance. So you always want to try to, there's two types of balance. There's symmetrical and there's asymmetrical. So when you look at this, I've just mimicked these plants. I've planted the same group on both sides. This is called symmetrical balance. This down here is asymmetrical balance. So even though I covered the same size of things, I used 3 medium-sized shrubs here versus 1 tree, but it's still balanced. There's not heavier weight going to one spot or the other. You can also use like balance and rhythm to coordinate your eyes somewhere. So these points right here, this is a busy, probably an evergreen, that says, hey, here's my front door, welcome to my house, kind of thing. There's another principle called accent. So accent is a specimen of some sort. So we'll just say this is north facing and you have a beautiful Japanese maple here or something that takes the shade, and it's got these beautiful bright red leaves, and it takes you to Japan. Very good. Okay, so accenting things creates interest. That's more a function of interest. Just little highlights through your yard. You can also create accents right in here because that's where you're trying to get people to go to, is to your front door. Let's see. Unity. So when I talk about unity, that's how you group things. Typically, you want to plant in 3s, 5s, 7s, odd numbers. And the principle is that you're not overwhelming the scheme. Gardeners, we have no hope. We plant anything and everything everywhere, right? But if you're trying to have that DIY or DIY or whatever, curb appeal, things like that, these are principles that you want to follow. So basically, unity. Here's unity here. You've got the same plants going on. It's not chaotic. It's not all over the place. Did I miss anything? Dominance is another way they refer to accent, just places you're trying to carry the eye. But here you can see that your eye, even though this is a pretty basic drawing, that your eye carries throughout the thing. It doesn't look all out of balance or like too much is going on. Other things you want to do are, here's a window, so I'm not going to plant a 10-foot hibiscus bush right in front of that because you can't look out the window. Things like that. There's a lot to it. So those are, like I said, this could be, I could go into a lot more detail about this, but that's the general principles. Mulching. Mulching is another wonderful thing you can do. 5? Okay. Mulching is a really wonderful thing you can do. It keeps the roots cooler. There's less water evaporation from the soil when you do that. And when you do organic mulches, which is barks, different colored barks. I'm like, bark. If we're in the South, maybe pine needles. I don't know. Okay, so you want to do those to a depth of 3 to 4 inches. So not only are you conserving water when you do that, but you're also preventing weeds from coming up. I'm going to save you some money right now. Don't bother with the weed barriers. Just don't do it. Look away. Don't let them convince you to do that. Because they break down, but what also happens is weed seed, you've got this organic mulch, so it breaks down, it almost kind of becomes like a soil up there. And then you have these weed seeds blow in, and then you have more weeds on top of your expensive weed barrier that you have to still get rid of. That's my opinion, and I think I just saw the Conservation Garden Park finally write an article about that, so I was pretty happy, like, oh, I've been right, I knew it. This is information that you learn when you work at a botanical garden, and you learn every problem known to gardening. Okay, if you use inorganic mulches, rocks, it's still relatively new. I kind of like the idea of the crushed up or the ripped up tires as well, that they dye and you can have different colors. That's 2 to 3 inches depth. So again, you save water. You're not allowing light to get to the surface, so you have less weeds. Keeps the roots cooler. When you apply this mulch to that depth, you don't want to go right up to the plants because you need to allow water and air to get through down into those roots. And a lot of times if those mulches are retaining moisture, they'll rot out the crowns of some plants. Efficient irrigation. I didn't write this specifically, but practical turf areas. That is, I made that point before, but practical turf areas, biggest bang for your buck on getting rid of water. Because perennial, when you think about grass, right now the state is saying you're watering your grass every 3 days. On even a moderate perennial bed, a moderate water usage bed, you can get away with once a week. So that's why they're talking about transitioning away from grass and also grouping these plants. You know, if you have a dog, you have kids, you gotta have some grass. They're not saying that. It's just having practical areas where you use that. Another thing that I really like to see, I have my front yard xeriscape, but I also really love it when I see vegetable gardens up front. That's a great use for that space. We've kind of gone away from being a front porch society, so take the grass out there, especially those parking strips. Please, I'll say it nicely, please. Pretty please. Okay, efficient irrigation. So another, besides having too much grass or not watering your grass properly, is your clocks. Efficient irrigation. So checking those heads, making sure they're not broken, tilted, or watering concrete. I promise you, I have yet to see this happen. If you water your concrete, it does not make more. It just doesn't. It's not going to expand. And adjusting your clock. So the state of Utah, the DWR site, so conservewater.utah.gov, they put out a weekly watering guide. So they tell you exactly what should happen for your particular area. They have it broken down into counties. And right now, of course, there's a general guide that says about every third day. But if we get a storm, I know it's hard. We're busy, right? You got to go turn that stupid clock off or get a smart controller that says, oh, it rained. Granted, we only get like a 16th of an inch, but those machines calculate that information out for you, and they readjust the watering schedule. The biggest thing also is starting irrigating too soon. I always want to go like put sticky notes on people's doors when I see them starting to water in March. I'm like, what are you doing? You know, those kinds of things. Or watering later in the season. If you, like I said, take out one watering schedule, 3,000 gallons of water. Maintenance, it's less work. Depending on how many perennials and shrubs you plant in, it is less work. You're not mowing, you're not aerating, you're not fertilizing, you're not putting in weed and feed. It is less work. It's different amounts of time at different times. You know, mowing the lawn that's what I go out and do after work. You know, once or twice a week. Twice if you're overwatering. No. But, you know, taking care of perennial beds or shrub beds. Shrub beds are the easiest. You can't get any easier than that. Perennial beds is like, you know, once a month, go out there, deadhead, pull some weeds, things like that. So less work. And you're providing water for the little rugrats that I hear out there, right? That's the biggest thing that has me keep going on this is I want to leave something respectable for my kids that, hey, we tried, we had a huge obstacle, and we met these goals for our state. And I think, you know, a lot of that, this is my final thing, so hang in there with me. You know, a lot of what I'm sure we've all been watching what's going on in the news, right? And it's pretty devastating. And I think my biggest conclusion about that is people's refusal, busy, can't handle it, ability to accept that there's a problem. So we have a problem with overuse of water. I just compared horrible, tragic events in the news to this. But it's all about accepting that there is a problem and doing what little part you can to make a difference. I mean, like I said, as much as I turn the water off when I brush my teeth, or, oh shoot, it's a rainstorm, run to the controller and shut it off, things like that. Just one little piece that you can do. Say you're only committed to taking out your parking strip. You did something, and your neighbors see that, and your kids see that, and that makes a difference. So with that, I will, if anybody has any questions.
Thanks, Faye. Any questions?
It's always the guy in the corner. Kidding. This, the Quell principles, fantastic information and lots of links to further information. You know, sometimes when you talk about a topic, it brings up another question. And this is, as you can tell, is through Utah State University. And they've done a lot of research on landscaping and waterwise landscaping and ways to save water and have that beauty that we still want to have in our yard. Oh, this is my last joke. So you don't want to make the changes and you want to hire someone? Here we go. This quellutah.com, it's a qualification program. So these people have been trained and tested on these principles, and you can go through and find a contractor. You can go through and find an irrigation specialist. You can go through and find a designer, things like that. If all these 7 principles, it's like, I work 40 hours a week. I want to go for a hike. I want to, you know, those kinds of things. Anybody else? Yeah.
So when we look at our water bill,
Yeah.
and we see how many gallons we use that month,
Yeah.
what's a good goal?
That's a new one. You've got me. Try to take down, well, group different times together, right? Don't be comparing your winter usage to summer usage, but calculate it out. Try to take off 25% of those gallons. That's what I would say. Utah uses 240 gallons per person per day. That's laundry, that's your washer machine, that's watering your yard. We use the most water out of any other state. Nevada, Vegas, those stupid fountains, they don't even use this much water. But on a uplifting note, with 18% conservation that we've achieved so far, the original number was 270 gallons per person per day. So we're getting there. It's just that people take on a little piece that they can do, like asking that specific question. I start working for this state on Wednesday. I'm gonna hit them up with that right away.
So those statistics you mentioned, is that spread over most residents? Or does I live on the UP campus and work on places where you are, see how much the building over there uses for parking or smart water, and the UP campus and supposedly litter, I think it doesn't run into some water. So are those averages brought up by like universities and
That's residential usage. So that's us. The highest facilities like that, I know we like to pick on them. We see them, like a government building, we're like, ew, you're watering. They are nothing compared to residences. The biggest user of water in Utah is agriculture. So naughty. They are so naughty. What the state is trying to do with that is, as these farms, as these owners, you know, become elderly, their kids got smarter and went to school, they didn't want to be farmers, which I totally understand because farming is hard. They try to purchase those farms and then take them out of production. So most of what we produce here is alfalfa, so it's food for your food, you meat eaters. Just kidding. Whole nother topic. Thank you for your time.